Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, articles, research notes, and, well, we try to pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're digging into something pretty significant. It's this huge concentration of market value in just a few dominant tech companies. You know, the ones, the Magnificent Seven in the S&P 500. But our mission here isn't just to talk about stock prices. It's really to get under the hood and understand the fundamental shifts, how these digital businesses actually operate, how they scale, how they generate so much value. We're going to use the material you share to unpack why these companies seem to be playing by different rules.
Absolutely. And what the sources really point to is it's not just that they're big, it's how their basic structure, their economic model is just, well, it's different. We're talking about a new economic paradigm, really. The underlying economics aren't the same as traditional industries. It makes some of the old industrial ways look almost linear, quite slow by comparison.
Okay, so the sources really hammer this point about unique scaling, how digital businesses grow differently. What's the key thing there that stands out?
Well, I think it really boils down to this idea of zero marginal cost of reproduction. Think about it, right? Once you've built the software or the platform or the cloud service, the cost of adding one more user is practically nothing. You take something like Microsoft 365 or AWS, they can reach the whole world almost instantly. No physical shipping, no major logistical hurdles for each new customer.
Right, unlike building another car or fridge.
Exactly. And that leads to these winner-take-most dynamics. Network effects are huge here. Look at Meta or Google Search or Apple's ecosystem. The bigger they get, the more valuable they become to each user, which just pulls in more users. It reinforces itself.
So it's a virtuous cycle for them.
It is. Now contrast that with, say, Caterpillar or Whirlpool. For every extra tractor or washing machine, they've got real rising cost materials, manufacturing, shipping, they hit bottlenecks. It's just a fundamentally different cost structure compared to adding another software subscription user.
And, reading through the materials, the next bit really jumped out at me. This idea that data and AI aren't just tools, they're compounding assets. Could you unpack that a bit? It sounds powerful.
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating. The data they collect, AI training data, user behavior patterns, analytics, it all feeds back into making the products better, continuously. And crucially, it does this without a proportional increase in cost. So you get this sort of self-reinforcing moat, a competitive barrier that just gets deeper and wider over time.
How so?
Well, more users mean more data. More data means better algorithms, smarter AI, more personalized experiences, and that attracts even more users. It's this loop, this cycle that's very hard for competitors to break into.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it links to another key point, persistent monetization. These digital products, they evolve while you're using them. Think about Microsoft Office turning into the 365 subscription, or Apple's App Store constantly adding features and services. They keep customers engaged, kind of locked in, because the product itself keeps improving.
Right, that's a really interesting point, the product evolving after the sale. Is there a counterexample in the physical world? Are traditional companies trying this?
Well, they try with software updates in cars, maybe, but it's limited. Imagine if your actual refrigerator could suddenly get 10% more energy efficient overnight through an update.
That would be something.
Right. Or if it started auto-ordering milk when you ran low. But physical products are generally static. Once you buy that fridge, that specific unit doesn't fundamentally change or improve. A digital service, though, it's alive. It changes month to month, year to year. Physical companies can improve next year's model, sure, but not the one you already bought.
Okay, so you've got this near zero cost scaling, plus data making the product constantly better. That must lead to some pretty serious financial advantages. The sources mention capital efficiency, high margins.
Absolutely. Software companies in particular often have, really high gross margins. We're talking 70, 80, sometimes even 90%. That just leaves a massive amount of cash flow for R&D, for acquisitions, for reinvestment, or share buybacks, of course.
And they don't need to build a new factory for every million users.
Precisely. That low capital expenditure, CapEx per dollar of revenue, is a huge differentiator. Manufacturers are tied to these big CapEx cycles. They need plants, machinery. They worry about raw material costs, labor costs, all things that inherently limit how high their margins can really go. Digital companies invest heavily, yes, but it's more in code and servers and intellectual property, things that scale much more efficiently.
So they scale cheaply, they improve constantly with data, they have high margins. How do they keep customers from just switching away? That brings us to lock-in, right?
Exactly. Durable customer lock-in. This is critical. Think about a large company that runs its entire operations on AWS or Azure, or uses Adobe's Creative Suite extensively. The cost and disruption of switching, it's enormous. You'd have to retrain staff, migrate vast amounts of data, rebuild workflows. It's often just not
A
feasible.
massive headache.
A massive headache. And you see it with consumers too, like with Apple's ecosystem,
Yeah.
your iPhone, your Mac, your iCloud, your watch. They all work together seamlessly. Moving away from that integrated environment involves friction, losing data, losing convenience. It creates stickiness.
Whereas switching, say, your brand of car or washing machine is usually much easier.
Generally, yes, you might prefer one brand, but the actual cost and hassle of switching are much lower. Physical goods often compete more directly on price or maybe incremental features for the next model. Switching your entire cloud infrastructure provider, that's a whole different level of commitment and cost.
So putting this all together, how does this reality get reflected in their market value? The sources talk about market cap reflecting intangibles, not just physical stuff.
Yeah, and that's a key insight. The enormous target capitalizations aren't just about the servers they own or the offices they lease. A huge amount of the value is tied up in things you can't easily touch: their intellectual property, the strength of their brand, the network effects of their user base, the ecosystems they've built. It's not just about units sold in the traditional sense.
So traditional ways of valuing companies might miss the mark here.
They often can, yes. Metrics tied purely to physical output or traditional assets can really underestimate the potential. They don't fully capture that exponential scaling potential of software revenue or the compounding value of the data assets and the network effects.
Okay, so for you, the listener, what's the big takeaway here? The sources seem to be saying, look, comparing these digital giants directly to traditional manufacturing companies is just misleading. They mentioned different growth curves, for instance.
Completely misleading. The growth trajectories are just different. A digital company can potentially double its user base or its revenue without anywhere near doubling its physical inputs or its workforce. That's hard for a physical goods company.
And the competitive environment.
Also fundamentally different. The digital world, because of those network effects and scaling advantages, it tends towards consolidation. You end up with a few dominant platforms. The physical economy tends to be more fragmented, limited by geography, by distribution challenges, by different regulations in different places.
And they face different bottlenecks, too.
Totally different constraints. Physical producers worry about supply chains, raw material prices, shipping costs, labor availability. What are the big constraints for the digital giants? Mostly things like bandwidth and computing power. And the remarkable thing is, the cost of those things has generally been falling over time. It's like playing a different economic game.
So to wrap up the core insight from this deep dive based on everything we've looked at,
Yeah.
this concentration we see in the S&P 500, the dominance of the Magnificent Seven, it's not just some temporary market weirdness. It looks like a real reflection of a fundamental economic shift that's happening.
Exactly. These companies are operating under a different set of rules. Scale is potentially exponential, not linear. Marginal costs can be near zero. Network effects and data create these really deep defensive moats. One of the sources used a great analogy. Comparing them to traditional companies is like comparing a railroad baron in the 1880s to a local guy making wagons. The scale, the network, the underlying economics, they're just not operating in the same universe.
So here's something to think about. If these are the new rules for how growth happens and how value is created, how might other industries, even ones that seem very traditional, very physical, how might they need to adapt? How could they integrate some of these digital principles, scale, data, intangibles, just to survive, let alone thrive in this changing world?